pieces of cut glass. This glass has already been cut and grinded on the edges so that it's not super sharp. You're also going to need some copper foil tape. This tape is strong with the backing on it, but once you take that backing off, it's going to be pretty flimsy, so you're going to want to be careful. Just like I talked to you about in class, the first thing you're going to want to do is measure the tape. Measure it and cut it before you start sticking it down. So you want to make sure that you always start in the middle of a piece of glass, just like I did here. And all I'm doing is measuring this around the edges of my glass so that my size is already where it needs to be, rather than using a big, long piece of copper. And I'm going to cut it. And then I'm going to peel just the first little bit away. And I'm going to put the non-sticky side down on my surface. I'm only going to undo about this much. I'm going to put that down on my surface so that I can start with my glass. And you want to put the glass down so that you can see some copper on this side and some copper on this side. So it's right in the middle. And then a little bit at a time, you will peel back the copper and try to keep it flat on your surface, and then work your way around, trying to continue to keep that copper right in the middle. If it starts to get off, luckily we haven't pressed it down with the popsicle stick yet. So you can always, if it's not centered, you can peel it back off and try to recenter it. When you get to that last side, it might be a little bit tricky. So I may have to peel it off once I get to this point, but you're going to make sure that it stays right in the middle so that once we do our next step, there's going to be copper on all of the edges. So you can see on each side that my copper kind of overlaps. Okay, the next step is that you're going to take a popsicle stick and you're going to really push that copper tape into the edges of each piece of your glass. Work on the edges first, and then we're going to kind of push those sides over and make almost like a little copper picture frame around our piece of glass. Okay, once you have that done and all of the pieces are down, then you're going to start pushing down the edges of that copper on both sides, working your way around. You want to make sure that it's really stuck down on there. So as you continue to go around, once you get to the end, actually, you're going to take that popsicle stick again and really make sure you get all of the air bubbles out. And you really want to make sure that the sticky side of that copper is really stuck to your glass. That is what is going to help you once we get to the soldering part of this project. That's how that reaction right there, that's how it's going to all stick together. So you want to really make sure that all of your sides are covered. If they're not perfectly equal, that's okay.
Classes 15, 3, and 8 are here. 15, 3, and 8.
Sorry about that. Like I said, you're going to want to make sure that there's copper on every edge so that it kind of creates a frame. If they're not perfectly even, that's okay, because once you put the solder over the top, most of, if not all of the copper is going to actually be covered up. I'm going to do a few more of these, and then I'm going to show you the step of soldering. To cut and measure first. So you go all the way around the edge of your piece of glass to make sure that your piece is going to be long enough with just a little bit of overlap, just like I showed you in class. Then when you're ready to put it on, you're going to start with just a little bit of copper first. This is going to help you keep control and also help you so that you can make sure that your copper is centered, or that your glass is centered in the middle of your copper. So I'm going to start with just one little piece. I'm going to put my glass down, and I'm going to make sure that I can see copper on either side. Then I'm just going to unpeel a little bit at a time, making sure that I'm keeping my glass in the center of my copper. If you realize that you got off center, then all you have to do is carefully peel it back, and you should be able to recenter it. Once you've done each piece, you want to make sure that you do have a little bit of an overlap. So I have done all the sides, and there's just this little bit of extra that I'm going to push back over the top. Now our next step, we're going to use a popsicle stick.
Bus 2 is here. Bus 2 is here behind the van.
The next step is we're going to use a popsicle stick to smooth down our copper foil and make sure that there aren't any air bubbles. You want to make sure that you really seal this in there, because where this is sealed is this is how your glass is all going to be held together. Because once you get to the solder will only stick to the places where there is copper. It won't stick to the glass itself. Okay, so the next step, you're going to take each edge of your copper and push it down and around the edges to kind of create almost like a picture frame on your piece of glass. When you get to the corners, you're just going to fold it over like a present. You want to try to make sure that you see that picture frame on both sides. That's why it's so important that you get it as close to the middle as you possibly can.
Bus 16 is down here, bus 16.
So you can see on mine that there is copper now framing both sides. It kind of looks like a nice piece of jewelry, actually. Then you're going to want to smooth that down with your popsicle stick again to make sure that you've really sealed it all in there and that there aren't any air bubbles and that everything is really stuck and sealed. Then you're going to go through the same process with all of your other pieces of copper. You don't want to get started doing the soldering until you have all of your pieces prepared. So I'm going to go and prepare a few other pieces so I can show you, and then I'll be back in a few to show you our next steps. To actually do the soldering, you need to get all of your pieces of glass lined up where you think you want them. So I've got all 4 of mine kind of staggered. You need to make sure you have your liquid glass flux. This just helps, it just helps keep all the pieces together. So the first thing you're going to do once you have them together, you're going to kind of paint this flux across all of your seams. Your seams are the kind of 2 points where each of your pieces of glass meets. Then you're going to take your solder, which is like this, and you're going to take your soldering iron, which is like this. And your soldering iron, like I was explaining in class, it literally is going to, as soon as you touch that solder, it's going to melt it. So you want to, before we do anything else, let's see if I can zoom in here so we can see better. You want to kind of tack these pieces together. Let me get adjusted here so we can see all 4 of them. So in order to tack it, you're going to just melt that solder right over where those seams are, and it starts to kind of liquefy. It's going to kind of make a little sizzle. But like I was telling you in class, it's not going to stick to the glass itself. It's only sticking to that copper. So once you have your pieces tacked down, so you want those little drops, kind of little drop get on each piece. And it's okay if some of it singes, we'll be washing that off. But once you've got it kind of tacked together, then you can use your soldering iron almost as like a pen to pull that solder across each of those seams. You do want it to be a little bit bumped up. So mine's a little thin right there. So I'm going to go back and add just a little bit more. And then I'm going to pull it across to smooth it out. And you're going to do that in each of those spaces. Some of it will seep through to the bottom. That's why tomorrow or today for all of you, we will be using a special mat underneath. Mrs. Suits forgot that mat today while I'm at CPS. So instead I'm using a piece of cardboard. Not the best tool, but we're going to make it work. Once you have all of those seams done, you are also going to get some solder on each of your edges. And we'll be pulling it around to the sides of those edges in just a minute. But I'm going to get a little bit on there to start with. Like I said, so I'm going to drop a little bit of solder right in the middle of this glass. It's not going to stick. It's just going to roll right off. And it's not going to go on there. It will only stick to the places that you have the copper. It also, just remembering, I didn't put the flux on all the edges. So once you get it tacked, then you're going to go back in with the flux, which is that liquid, and you're going to make sure that you've added it to all of your edges. Now, before I actually do the edges, it should be okay to touch at this point, not too hot. I'm going to flip it over. You can see some of it kind of seeped through, but not very much. So I'm going to go back in with my flux again, make sure I've got all of my edges. And then I'm going to go back in with my iron and back in with my solder, and then kind of do a drop right in the middle of each one of those again. Give myself enough to kind of pull across each of those seams. If it gets too thick in a spot, and you'll see this when you're doing it, the cool thing is that all you have to do is kind of go back over the top of it again, and it's going to thin it down and allow you to spread it. Okay, so now I'm going to go and start working on my edges, and you'll come back in at the end and kind of smooth everything out. The cool thing, the solder kind of sticks to your iron. My focus isn't very good right now, but as you melt it off, if you melt a lot, it's going to drip. If you don't melt a ton at a time and just do little by little, then it's actually going to just stick onto your soldering iron. If some of it kind of bubbles up, like some of mine is here on the edges, that's okay, because like I said, we're going to smooth it out. You can also, it's really easy to kind of recycle the solder. So I dropped a piece right here on the side. It makes a cool like little bead almost, but you can kind of melt it and pick it back up. Now, remember, it is hot metal. As I explained in class, it's like molten metal. So you want to be really careful not to touch it. There's going to be some wait time involved. So I'm going to kind of thin each of these out. And then I am going to kind of sit and wait. So I'm going to come back in just a minute once it's had some time to cool off so that I can pick it up and start working on the sides. Because even though you're not actually using the solder on the top of the glass itself will be hot too. Just like if you put something in the oven, even though it's not touching the coils, it's still going to be hot. So in order to get the sides really well, I want to make sure that I'm able to pick it up and move it around. So I'm going to come back in just a minute to show you how to do that. To kind of go around and work our way on the edges, little bubbles of the solder have kind of come off. Those are the parts that got on the flux. Because I walked away for a few minutes, I'm going to go ahead and kind of reflux my edges. Now, this is going to be hot, so you're going to have to be really careful. And you need to just take your time. It's not a race. Or if it is a race, it's a marathon. Now, I am going to create kind of a bubble of solder that I'm going to put on the top so that I can then pull it all along the edge. Yours will be a little bit easier to pull along the edge because all of yours, your shapes are a little bit bigger than mine. Mine are kind of small. So, like I said, I'm going to drop my solder down, get the rest of my little edges covered up here. Once I have some on there, then I'm going to pick it up and try to start going around my edges. So I'm going to get a little bit more of a bubble up here just to give myself something to work with. Okay. So now that that's ready, see how it's all big and bubbled up on the edges? And my top is still copper. It's hard to tell on the video, but it is. It's still copper. So I'm going to take it, and I got little pieces kind of falling off because I put a little too much on there. You're going to take it and kind of seal all of your edges. And once you have some on there, most of the time it can get you pretty far. Sealing all my edges. I'm thinning out some of my pieces on top, working to get some of those bubbles off. Now, every time as it dries, I'm going to kind of flip it. I apologize, I'm not even in the camera. As it dries, I'm going to kind of flip it back and forth. You want to just make sure that you've sealed every single side. So all of my tops, outside of down here, I haven't done the bottom half yet, but all of my tops are pretty well sealed. Every single edge on the top and across my middles is pretty much sealed. And I'm going to see if I can get this to show. Not the greatest focus, but you can see that in between, you can see here and here that here and here, that there is a bit of a bump. You want that to be bumped up. That's where that solder is creating that seal. All right, I'm going to pause the camera while I finish this up, and then I will come back and show you how to put the coil on. And then we'll rinse them off and let them cool, and we'll be all done. Smooth the way that you want. There will be some spots that look a little charred. We will be kind of wiping these off once they are cooled and all ready. The last thing, though, that we need to do, I actually realized mine is upside down. Since I want my red to be the top of my piece of artwork, I am going to attach my little coil to the top. I'm going to attach it where it overlaps. So I have the coil here and there's a spot that it overlaps. And I'm going to, this is tinned copper. So this is also copper. So the solder will adhere to this. And I am going to actually, we were kind of looking at these little bubbles. I'm going to kind of pick up, maybe I'm going to pick up one of these little bubbles, work it over here to this edge. And right where I have that edge, while it's nice and hot, oh, I forgot to put my flux on. Okay, put the flux on. I'm gonna get my copper kind of hot, or my solder hot. And then I'm going to kind of let that seal in there. I might grab one more little piece to put in with it. That little copper wire is going to be hot right off the bat, so you don't want to go and grab it right away. Won't feel good if you do. Once you've got it covered in there, then you're going to let it cool and it should kind of stay. Like I said, at this point, the side you're going to kind of have looking out, if you want to kind of clean any of it up a little bit, some of those char marks, those just happen as little specks of dirt get into it. But once you clean it off, you won't really see those anymore. So those will be gone. But you can just kind of reheat and smooth out some of your different surfaces. Turn my heat down. It's taken a minute for my solder to get warmed up. Okay. So yeah, like I said, you can just kind of go back over each of your spaces to get it smoothed out how you like. Then you're going to have to let it cool. After it cools, you're going to just very carefully and delicately kind of rinse it off and then dry it off right away. Let's see if this is in there now. It's still a little bit warm. You want to make sure that this is secure. So mine's on there pretty good, but one end is kind of flipping up a little bit. So I'm going to just heat this side up a little bit so that it stays on there. All right, so now that I've got that sealed, let's see if I can turn it so we can see it better. All right, I've got that hook sealed on there. Once all of this cools, you're going to want to run it just very quickly under the sink to just get any excess kind of tarnish off of it. And then we're going to let it dry and it'll be ready to wrap for Christmas.